Welcome to the PlayNation Podcast, Episode 3. I am one of your hosts, Joe Quinn, and I am alongside the king of PlayStation, Micah Magruder. Micah, how are you today?
Hey there, Joe. I'm doing great. I'm so excited we're doing Episode 3 here. We got some great topics lined up, so I'm pretty excited.
Your greatness is an elixir for my soul. It makes me feel great, right? So when you feel great, then I feel great, and then I think everyone feels great. So another week, Episode 3, the are marching on, right, as we lift off into outer space with these episodes, one after another, 300% episodes. We're doing phenomenal. And by the way, to the listeners out there, hopefully we should see, so our listeners have mentioned that audio quality, hopefully in this episode, we should see a little bit of an improvement on audio quality. Michael, we're ironing out these kinks here. This is a show in progress. We're working hard on these things.
Exactly. And, we should be able to thank our sponsors. Unfortunately, we don't have any yet, but it is really great that you have that new Yeti mic. You sound wonderful coming through that thing.
Thank you. And I'll tell you this. I mean, we want to be transparent with the audience. We want to let everyone know, hey, look, audio quality issues, we hear you. We're on top of it. We respond, right? So in other words, when you talk, we listen, right?
Exactly.
So
what came before FM? AM radio. Did AM radio have great quality? No, it didn't, but it was great.
AM radio, I think, just real trash quality. But then FM radio came along, right?
Exactly.
And now we have Howard Stern. So, it's all, here's what I'm saying. It's a sliding scale. It all slides forward.
Right.
So, obviously the quarantine continues in another week, right? So this is now, I would say, the beginning of winter as we, live on the East Coast. It is now becoming the East Coast winter that we all know. Right. So, Micah, what have you been up to this week? What's new with you?
Trying to stay warm. Yeah, it's a little cold out here. But other than that, trying to get outside, get that vitamin D when I can, doing the Christmas shopping thing. Picked up a few things. I don't know if my kids are listening or not. So should I actually even say what I got them? But I think they should be pretty excited by some things. Keeping up on a few video games too. Definitely playing through Sackboy, one of our topics today, and also Ghost of Tsushima, a nice Black Friday pick I got picked up. And I got to say, with that game, it's just the combat is just, you definitely got to know how to parry, how to block. Man, I had to put it on easy for some things. It was just ridiculous how bad I am at this game. But I'm trying to go back to medium so I can be able to learn. And then also going back to Red Dead for some insane reason. I want to get the platinum in that game. Also, they just released an online update, which upset a lot of people, understandably, because Rockstar is having a hard time listening to their people, what they're wanting. But going back to that game, just looking at it and just thinking, man, this was definitely just a beautiful game to just relax through and just experience an open world that was just pretty immersive.
You're a sick man trying to go back and get that platinum in Red Dead Redemption 2. That's the act of a madman. I find that kind of alarming. It's a very difficult platinum, and not only that, but if there are trophies in that game that are sensitive to, I would say, like decisions and things that occur. I think specifically in Chapter 4, something happens. I think that's right about when I kind of noped out of the game a little bit. I was just like, well, this is going to be a little bit too much for me. But that is, I would say, if you attain that Red Dead Platinum, God loves you for it, right? And by the way, you're buying these gifts. I think you mean to say Santa bought these gifts, right? These are gifts that Santa has brought along, right? And
you would think that, but we had that talk last year, right before Christmas. Because yeah. So as your kids get older and they get a little bit more bolder and talk to you, they say random things like you're Santa and stuff like that, and you're like, what? So eventually we had that talk, because what we did is we realized, you know what, we're not going to keep lying to them. They're smarter than
Right.
we give them credit for. So we had that talk of my parents never told us who was Santa. I don't even remember how I found out and how that discussion happened. But we decided we wanted that discussion, so we had that discussion that, yes, Santa is an idea. Santa is, based off of a, folklore, Kris Kringle, and, probably all sorts of other names he has too. But now that you know who Santa is, you become the Santa. At this point, you start spreading Christmas cheer and giving presents and things like that. So go out there and get a job and get me something nice for Christmas this year.
not only am I giving you information, I'm also giving you a task to do. This is now your job, right? So in other words, now not only is this now a thing, this is now a thing that you have to do.
This
But
isn't a blessing; it's a curse.
And by the way, I don't have any kids, but my understanding is that you really, I mean, in some ways, you never stop lying to your children, right? But you know,
Right.
in this particular instance, makes sense. I also have been playing Sackboy. We're going to get into that with the first topic, right? So I've been playing Sackboy. I've been playing a couple other things, but just to go a quick overview for our listeners, here's what we're going to be talking about today. Topic 1 is going to be Sackboy, A Big Adventure in review. We're going to talk about the new Sackboy game, launch title for PS5. We're also going to be talking about the Game Awards coming up on December 10th, hosted by Jeff Knightley. And we're going to go over our predictions in terms of who we think is going to win, who we think is going to lose, and some of the highlights of the games that are being presented there. A real celebration of video games, if you will. And lastly, we're going to be touching on a leak that was leaked through Vice with regard to Sony and their views on single player games and how they view single player games, if single player games are thriving or in fact, you know, dying. So they actually go over that in terms of their internal presentation, which was leaked out. So we'll go over that and how we feel about it, right?
Right.
So Micah, if you are ready, right, I would say let's jump right into it, right? Topic number 1. Sackboy, A Big Adventure in review, released on November 12th to coincide with the release of the PS5. From developer Sumo Digital comes Sackboy, A Big Adventure. And this is a third-person 3D platformer about a sack of fluff named Sackboy who is trying to become the knitted knight who saves Craftworld. So that is sort of the high-level explanation of the game, who it's from. Micah, what do you feel about it?
So as I'm playing through this game and having been spoiled by Astro's Playroom and thinking, man, I just wish this game was like, 20 hours rather than the 6 hours it took to platinum it. Playing through the game, at first, it took me a little bit of time to kind of get into it at first. It was just one of those games where I was just like, I wish I was Astro right now. But started to clear my mind from that and started to think, okay, this is its own game, and started playing it and started enjoying it. Particularly when I got into this level, I forget and this is just how unprepared I am. There's one particular level when I realized that they licensed a lot of music in this game. Mm-hmm. And the game, the level was, they were doing Uptown Funk by Bruno Mars. And just the level design in this game is amazing because the background assets are just swaying to the music. The enemies are actually kicking out to the music too. And like you get to the point where like you get to the bridge to the, Uptown Funk gonna give it to you. It's the whole process where Sackboy's being launched from here to there and everything. And it's just really, really clever use of music compared to other games I've seen. I've seen a lot of games where they use music like, Dance Central and Just Dance, where it's like, hey, you're just dancing. But to actually utilize music like this, it is definitely really, really cool.
I agree. And I actually have a pretty aggressive take on Sackboy, A Big Adventure, which is that, and I sort of foreshadowed my opinion on this at the end of the last episode, which is that I think in many ways, this is Sony out Nintendoing Nintendo in so many ways, right? So I look back and I sort of see in the Switch generation, 3D platformers that were released, and 2 stand out really, really immediately. One of which, well, actually, there are 3 that stand out pretty immediately. One of which is the big one, which is Mario Odyssey. And then there are 2 other sort of smaller ones, which is Kirby had a game, and then Yoshi had a game. So Yoshi had another Woolly World game. Right. And I'm looking at Astro's Playroom, and I'm looking at Sackboy, A Big Adventure, and I love Sackboy, A Big Adventure. I love it. I think it's such a fantastic platformer. It's challenging at the end if you would like it to be. It's very easy and family friendly at the beginning if that's what you want it to be. And when you incorporate sort of, again, Sony sort of utilizing all of the tentacles in the Sony platform, being able to utilize, Sony music, right? It wouldn't shock me if there's a Sackboy 2, if they're going to utilize Sony Pictures in some way. Maybe there's a Die Hard level. I don't know.
Oh, right? My gosh, that would be hysterical. That would be great.
But it really feels like, and again, I don't think anyone would begrudge Sony or PlayStation for sort of resting on their laurels and just sort of enjoying that mature, single player experience sort of space and thriving in that, which obviously we'll get into in topic number 3. But I don't think anyone would begrudge Sony for sort of sitting there and resting there, which seems to be what Nintendo is doing with family-friendly mascot platformers. They seem to be just sort of resting there. To me, this feels like Sony and PlayStation very much catching up in a big way. And maybe it's just because like I was watching Console Wars on CBS, the story of Nintendo and Sega in the 90s and how they battled it out. Nintendo had this immense 95% market share. And over time, Sega, whittled away at it. It seemed insurmountable. And eventually, for a short period of time, they took the lead. This feels like Sony and PlayStation planting seeds to sort of start to chip away at the Nintendo first, sort of the Nintendo family-friendly platformer sort of market share dominance that they've had. Because Sony really hasn't had that. In PlayStation 1, they had Crash Bandicoot, but that's really an Activision sort of game, and that's not really Sony first party proper. Astro's Playroom is. Sumo Digital is actually defined as a second party game. But I look at it this way. If we see Sackboy A Big Adventure 2, and it's just as good, and maybe Sony buys Sumo Digital, maybe we see Sony come out with like a Sony Pony kind of Animal Crossing sort of hybrid, right? I don't know. Am I overstating this by saying that I can see Sony and PlayStation starting to infringe on sort of the family-friendly environment that Nintendo has kind of cultivated?
I don't think you're out of step to say that, because we've seen that with Astro's Playroom. And I remember reading, where was it, Reddit, Twitter, something like that, but somebody had a PS5 talking about just Astro's Playroom, talking about his niece and nephew anytime they come over, saying, can we play the robot game? I mean, it's just like, playing a Mario game, it's just like, that instant click, with kids. And that's, I think, what Sony's finally going for, is trying to get a slice of that pie that the PlayStation's for everybody. And it's, that's not a bad thing. That's what Xbox was trying to do too. It's for everybody, it's going to be a media center. It's going to be everything. But for Sony and the PlayStation, it's specifically for gaming. And the thing about Sackboy that I love, it's just very clever, and it's very, very cute. Right? It's like, and it's not overly cute that it makes you want to, get sick over it or anything like that. It's just, you look at Sackboy, you look at his expressions, you change around his expressions and things like that. And it's just very, very cute and fun to play with. And I don't know if you've had the chance to experience co-op or not, but yes, co-op is very, very fun. So you actually get a little trophy just for, it's called the Soar Winner Trophy, and it was hysterical. Whenever you actually finish a level, you're at the end, and you're both on the platform about to take a picture. You slap the other player, and I was like, oh my gosh, we got a trophy just from doing that. And it was just funny. It was just natural. I didn't even know that was a thing. I'm planning on eventually platinum this thing as soon as I finish it, but right now it was just fun to play co-op, because I'm trying to get my son involved, because he's always saying I'm bored. I'm like, well, let's play Sackboy. I mean, you and I can play it. We can have some fun with it. We can do a couple levels, and there are a lot of levels that are co-op only. And what I do like is that if you're playing co-op, some of the level assets, like things you have to, I forget what they are, but they're like little yarn knits you have to pull. Mm-hmm. Instead of being a single player thing where you only have one, you have to cooperate. You have to do it together. So it's a lot of fun to be able to do that together, to be like, all right, you can't go running off doing your own thing. We have to do this together. So I'm only playing with just 2 players, because I only have 2 controllers, but I think it goes up to 4. Mm-hmm. And I think it would be a battle royale if it ever got up to 4. But it definitely a lot of fun. Good for the whole family. My boys aren't getting too into it. So, I don't know why. They're into their own things. That's fine. But it's just one of those games that I agree with you on the concept that Sony's definitely going for and wanting these titles that are family friendly, kid friendly, because you got to think, we have a whole generation of gamers that already know what they want, right? But you have this new generation of people who are, they're 7, 6 years old, they're going to go down the Nintendo route. I mean, Sony's saying, why, when you can come to us, we got a lot of games that you can have.
I had this revelation as I'm playing the game, and it felt like, in a way, when I'm watching a Pixar movie. So in other words, if I'm watching a Pixar movie and I'm watching whether it's WALL-E or Up or something along these lines, and I find myself laughing, and I'm laughing at a joke that is it's very obviously designed for the adult in the room, right? So not all the jokes inside of these, which you would say are family-friendly Pixar movies, all the jokes aren't directed at the kids. There were moments in Sackboy: Big Adventure that are very clearly geared towards me. Like, for instance, when you mentioned that how they utilize, the Sony music products and all that stuff. During the level, there's one level, no spoilers, I won't say when or where, but it utilizes a Britney Spears song, which I had to grab Erica. I was like, hey, babe, you have to come down here. You have to experience this. And it was just very clearly a moment where, like, we were enjoying it, right? It wasn't like necessarily a kid-centric moment. It felt like a cultural moment for us, right? And you're right. And the second point is that you're right about the co-op. Eric and I play all the time. Right? So in other words, we play almost on a nightly basis. We do co-op levels. We did all the co-op levels. By the way, I'm very close to the platinum in this game. We decided, just to give the audience an update, I was saying how I think that Miles Morales is going to be my 100th platinum trophy, right? So I'm actually now reconsidering this, where I think I want Sackboy: A Big Adventure to be my 100th platinum trophy. Because I think it's a little bit more prestigious. It's obviously the Little Big Planet intellectual property. It's a little bit more Sony, right, than say Spider. Well, so Spider-Man's very Sony, but it's a little bit more Sony video gaming, and as well, it's more challenging, right? So in other words, it's more prestigious. I don't know if you've seen, but when you get to the end of the game, or as you're going through the game, you unlock these trials. Have you tried any of the time trials that have?
I have tried the time trials, and I thought about tweeting at you like, "Hey, I'm 2 seconds faster than you on this one." But then when I went to another game, you were like 5 or 6 seconds faster than me. So I mean, yeah, it's kind of fun, the leaderboards and everything like that. You can see the leaderboards of who your friends are playing, and also, I think there's worldwide. I didn't even look at that, but yeah, no, the time trials are fun. Simply because of the fact that you definitely have to be on your game to just take those risks. Go ahead and jump over here to get 2 extra seconds and then jump back really quick.
And so when and look, once I get the gold medal in the time trial, I just that's it. I'm on out of there, right? So in other words, I'm on to the next one. I'm not trying to get best time. You know what I mean? I get the gold. See you later, right? And then if you do all 15, which we've done all 15 at this point, it actually unlocks a 16th one, which there's a trophy attached to this, which, by the way, is maddening in a way, but I actually am enjoying the challenge. But there's a trophy attached to getting a gold in the 16th trial. And the 16th trial is called the Rip Snorter. And the Rip Snorter is essentially all 15 trials all put together. And it's all one trial. You can't, again, you have one life. If you die, you go back to the beginning. There's no checkpoints, and you have to do it all in under 10 minutes. So Godspeed to me in trying to get this. But if I can get that, I think that would be that would be a phenomenal 100th platinum trophy to get that done. But the other thing was that we thought about it and we said, well, we can do there's also a trophy attached for doing a high five between 2 sack people. So that we were saving that trophy. That would be the last trophy, is that we would do the high five at the end, and then that would be the 100th platinum trophy. And I think that would be.
I think that is more. I'm for that, simply because of the fact that when I do platinums, I like the last trophy to be somewhat meaningful. And yeah, that's definitely a very meaningful kind of thing. It's that high five, we're done.
Wouldn't that be cool? We were going to look through, we were going to find sort of a very scenic part of the game and then do the high five. And then that would be the last trophy. And then that would churn over the 100 platinums. That would be a great moment. But in regards to Sackboy as a game, I think that, it visually, like, it does have sort of that Pixar feel, right? Not as quite as much as say like a Ratchet and Clank in terms of that, but it, like, you can see like everyone looks like yarn people. It does look almost like a Yoshi Woolly world in that way.
Yeah.
That it does have that really, really fine textures that you see on the Sack people, which is really cool. The audio is amazing. The use of we talk about the music is amazing. By the way, they also do a great job of scrubbing it out if you try to share the clips, right? So if you try to share the clips, it won't let you share the Britney Spears song. I tried.
You can't share the magic. It's unfortunate, but I've seen other people do it. So I wonder if they're just, recording their screen or something. But yeah, it is definitely understandable, but disappointing.
And lastly, the last thing I'll touch on, we kind of already hit this with the trials, but the gameplay end of it, right? So it is extremely tight as a platformer. Look, I grew up on Mega Man. I'd like to consider myself very proficient, if not an expert, at platforming video games. This is a very, very tight platformer. And as well, when you do the time trials and you go through the time trials, it showcases that, like, because you have to be able to roll. You have to be able to jump while rolling.
Yep.
It's a very, very tight platformer.
Yep, you definitely have to be able to. You can't just rush through it, slapping everything. You definitely have to know when to jump back. And I'm only like 5 hours into it, I want to say. So I'm not as into it as you are. And I saw the videos you were doing, and it was just ridiculous because some of the abilities you get later on. But yeah, no, it's definitely a good platformer where you have to be able to know, you have to be fast. You have to also know when to slow down too. You don't always jump into the fray. And one thing I'd like to touch on is I appreciate the subtle uses of the DualSense. So a great example of it is if you jump off the level and die, all of a sudden you will hear Sackboy screaming through your controller. And that was a very surprising moment. I kind of cracked up for a few seconds there because I'm like, my controller just screamed at me. And it was just a very cool moment to think, they're not doing anything too gimmicky or anything like that. And I've seen other games, you've seen Miles Morales use the DualSense a little bit, and it was just kind of like, okay, that's kind of cool. But just those subtle things like that is just really, really awesome to see.
Yeah, the scream that comes out of your controller when you fall off a cliff or something like that is, when I first heard it, I was like, wow, that's really cool. Like that's like, oh, interesting. But then as I'm playing through as example, like I'm going through the rips in order and I'm dying like every 45 seconds or so, I swear to God, it's going to send me to a mental hospital, right? So in other words, just hearing that scream come out every few seconds. But the last piece was that it scales up. The difficulty can scale up. And that's just the last point I wanted to make, which is that when you play Yoshi, when you play Kirby, right? These games, they scale up, but they don't ever really reach a point where it becomes sort of white knuckle challenging. If you go to Mario does this very, 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 very well. Especially if you go to Mario 3D World, right, for the Wii U and a couple other games, they have challenges in those games that are excruciatingly difficult. And I like that Sackboy took the time to make the trials, to put in sort of the thing for someone like me to go through. And, I can enjoy the sort of the disgustingly awful challenge of getting through these gold medals. So I like that it scales up, that it is difficult if you want it to be. It doesn't have to be, but if you want it to be, it can be.
Right. It's definitely a nice feature for sure.
So Sackboy, do we recommend Sackboy?
I absolutely do, and I recommend it even if you have an OG PS4, simply because of the fact that you should go check out a Digital Foundry video where they go through the differences in how Sumo Digital designed the game to run on PS4, PS4 Pro, and PS5. And you have a solid, almost 60 frames per second experience on even the original PS4. Gameplay-wise, you won't ever see hitches or anything like that throughout the game, or at least not that they detected. Throughout a few cutscenes, there are a few dips, I think, to like 56, 57 or something like that. But otherwise, it's amazing what they do. They basically, all the PS5 hardware. It's really good at being able to show off reflections and light. And so they swap out assets where things in PS5 might be reflective to be able to show, the lighting and the reflections. In the PS4 versions, that will be a different texture, so it won't actually do that. But you won't notice that unless you actually go looking for that. So if you have the original PS4, I'd recommend it. I mean, it's a great game.
Yeah, high recommendation. I think that it's a terrific purchase. I don't think you're missing anything if you're playing the PS4 version. I think, minus some sounds in your controller or maybe a little bit of the haptic feedback when you're pulling out the seedlings, if you will. So I don't think you're missing too much. I think would be a fantastic PS4 game. By the way, our listener question, right? So you can write in if you would like to be part of the show. You can write in to show@playnationpodcast.com. So we have a question for this particular topic, which is, and again, I already alluded to this, but do you think Sumo Digital would make a good purchase for Sony first party? My obvious answer was, I think yes. I think if they produce Sackboy 2, and Sackboy 2, another big adventure, is just as successful as this game and just as the high quality as this game, I think that makes tremendous sense. And just Sumo Digital, much how like Insomniac is a Spider-Man developer for Sony, make Sumo Digital the Sackboy. I mean, this instills a lot of confidence in me in Sumo Digital that they could be a Sackboy developer and just churn out these games.
Yeah, so if I look at the existing Sumo Digital lineup of games, right, going back to 2004 when they made England International Football for the original Xbox under publisher Codemaster. And I'm thinking, I never played that. And I'm looking through this list trying to think right now. I never played a lot of these. I never even heard of some of these. And I'm thinking, yeah, I'm definitely in agreement with you. Oh, apparently they made for Forza Horizon 2. Had no idea. If they're still doing Forza, it's going to be hard for them to buy them. But other than that, I mean, I'm looking at some. Oh, they did Crackdown 3. Never knew. I mean, some of these. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to say Sumo Digital being a very sort of uniquely British developer. I mean, you could see that all through the game. You could see that British sort of the whole in that way, right? So it's actually really cool in that sense. That's but yeah. So Sumo Digital, yeah, they have a pretty solid history, but I think this is going to be their launch point.
Right, definitely. I think the fact that they were entrusted with Sackboy, which is a Sony property, you won't see Sackboy and Little Big Planet on other non-Sony products. I think they were entrusted to make a great game. But looking at their future lineup, I'm thinking, I don't know if it's in the works just yet. It seems like Sumo Digital likes to work with a lot of different publishers.
And lastly, shout out to the game taking place in Craft World, which if for the PS Vita fans out there, if you're playing on your PlayStation Vita and you're playing Tearaway, right? Shout out to Tearaway on Vita, phenomenal game. Anyway, Micah, I would say we've sufficiently reviewed Sackboy. I would say now we need to move on to topic number 2, which I think is a very, very exciting topic, the Game Awards and the predictions that will then follow. The Game Awards is an annual awards ceremony honoring achievements in the video game industry. Established in 2014, the shows are produced and hosted by Canadian games journalist Jeff Niley, who worked on its predecessor, the Spike Video Game Awards, for over 10 years. In addition to the awards, the Game Awards also feature premieres of new games and in-depth looks at previously announced ones. So the Game Awards, been around since 2014. I've grown to really like these. As someone who really doesn't watch the Oscars, as someone who really doesn't watch the Emmys, I don't really get into award show buzz. And I'll go into why I'm digging the Game Awards, but at least in the last 2 years. But Micah, what is your take on the Game Awards before we get into nominations?
So I watched the Emmys and I watched the Oscars, knowing full well that, most of the winners are usually who lobbied the most and paid the most. And, right. I don't know much about the Game Awards to say whether or not it's the exact same thing, but you look at the list of the titles and, you just know a lot of these are, a lot of indie games aren't going to get the buzz that, first party games are going to get. But yeah, my thought process is that, I'm excited for the Game Awards, not just because, it's a end of year feat of, look at these great games we had over the years, but also the exciting announcements that are going to come out. There's some buzz around a few games like I think BioWare with Dragon Age. There's probably a few other surprises we will see that show up at maybe even just a trailer for existing games, new gameplay footage. But they definitely got a lot of star lineup for this event because it's going to be a virtual one, right? So you have the ability to be able to include a lot more people. And I'm hoping they do a little bit of fan service too. Who knows? Maybe they included fans in some way. I think it'll be an interesting look at how they try to do things compared to, how Hollywood does things with the Emmys and stuff like that.
Yeah, my big concern with the Game Awards moving forward is what you already addressed, which is that I hope that it maintains the integrity and in terms of the winners and losers, and that, lobbying and money and all that stuff can kind of stay out of it. The Game Awards is also very transparent in terms of how it determines its winners, right? It is voting, and it's voting through games journalists, and it gives a list of the games journalists who vote. There's even a Player's Choice Award. We'll go into that, but so I hope it maintains the integrity. The reason why that, as someone who doesn't really gravitate towards these award shows, the reason why I like it over the last couple of years is because as we see E3 begin to sort of, I don't want to say disappear, but I think it is in many ways disappearing.
It is.
Right. So it's Nintendo doesn't participate. Sony no longer participates. They then pivoted E3 to become this almost like Comic-Con like event, which was then interrupted by a global pandemic, right? So not good news for E3 at all, right? So as they continue to sort of fade out, it seems like because I like the notion. I was a big fan of E3 in the sense that it seemed like the one day a year that the games industry could come together and have sort of this global moment, right? So we can have this sort of moment where everyone's come together. That one moment, I believe it was a year or two ago, where you had Sean Layden, Reggie Fils-Aimé, and Phil Spencer on the stage at the same time. Very powerful moment. So you can have this sort of collective togetherness that the Game Awards can bring people together. I like that. So, and if it's going to replace E3, I'm okay with that, right? In that particular way, right? So that's the reason why I've been gravitating towards it as well. It's just fun to watch. There is going to be some star power this year. I think Gal Gadot is going to be there. Famed gamer and Animal Crossing consumer Brie Larson is going to be there. I'm assuming Keanu Reeves is going to like show up in a sports car promoting Cyberpunk 2077, something like this. So there's going to be a musical performance. So I don't know. It does have a lot of draw to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been following Jeff on Twitter just to see what's being announced, but I'm kind of like keeping my memory for a little forgetful, so that way I'm a little bit more surprised when I actually watch.
And Jeff is great, isn't he? I mean, talk about a man with just, integrity for days. That man is amazing. I could follow Jeff for as long as he wants to host this thing. I mean, it's his deal, right? It's his baby. He can host this thing forever. I'm totally cool with that.
Yeah, I have no qualms with him. He did a good job explaining the PS5 when he got the first hands on. Lucky guy.
Yeah. So I'm going to go in reverse order in terms of categories, and we'll go through. We can talk about it for a little bit. We can spend as much time or as little time as we want on each individual category. If I count them up here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Looks like we have 6 categories that we're going to go over, and we'll just predict winners. And like I said, we can talk as little or as much as we want. Let's start first with best performance. And by the way, as video games become increasingly sort of narrative and you see games like The Last of Us Part 2, Last of Us Part 1, God of War, the performance aspect of it I really like. Here are the nominees for 2020: Ashley Johnson as Ellie, Laura Bailey as Abby, Daisuke Tsuji as Jin Sakai, Logan Cunningham as Hades, and Naji Jeter as Miles Morales, right? So any particular takes or what do we need to know about this best performance category?
So I think the fact that Naughty Dog released a trailer for The Last of Us Part 2 in the past week, highlighting Abby, the character from The Last of Us Part 2, is so this is one of those, you either love them or hate them. And the majority of Last of Us players, and I say Last of Us, not Last of Us Part 2 players, Last of Us players absolutely hated the character of Abby with good reason. It's understanding. And they feel it was a character that was forced on them, but Naughty Dog, I think with the release of that trailer showing Abby's motivations, Abby's performances, I think there's a reason they did that, simply because of the fact that they want to showcase what a phenomenal job this character does. I don't necessarily agree or disagree, right? I'm just looking at it from this point of view of what reaction people get out of her. And the best characters, the best performances are the ones you remember the most, where you absolutely either love this person or hate this person. And sometimes, I hear the comment that it's not that I hated her performance, I just hated what they did. And, the performance was boring and things like that. And it's like, okay, that's fine. But it elicited a reaction. And I think there's a reason they did that. My personal take, I think Naji Jeter did a great job as Miles Morales. I would put some money on him, but and I'm butchering this, I apologize, Daisuke did a great job as Jin Sakai. I'm enjoying Ghost of Tsushima. I'm butchering that as well, but I appreciated that game, and I like the amount of representation here across the spectrum for different characters. Particularly the fact that 2 of these nominees are from the exact same game too. So seeing multiple characters, I'm putting my money on them as the underdogs. One of them to actually win.
So a couple things, right? So first I want to touch on Naji Jeter, which is that, by the way, I noticed this instantly, that Naji Jeter is actually Sam. He was Sam from the original Last of Us. And so shout out to
a great performance in there too.
Yeah. Shout out to Naji Jeter, right? So he's amazing at what he does. Keep doing your thing, Naji. But I don't think that's who I would pick necessarily as the winner here. By the way, Daisuke for Jin Sakai, I don't know that I have to go back and look at this. I don't know that I actually heard Daisuke for more than a second or two, just because I don't know if you did this, but I played Ghost of Tsushima. When I played it with Japanese, with the Japanese language, with the the English subtitles beneath it. Right. So in other words, I did Japanese and then the English subtitles. So I don't know if Daisuke was he both Japanese and English in terms of performance?
That's what I'm going to have to look up right now while you keep talking. It's a good question because I did the exact same thing too. I cycled back and forth.
a game like Ghost of Tsushima, to me, it just felt natural that they're speaking Japanese, and that just felt like that felt the natural. That felt the game was in its natural element, and having the English subtitles to me felt more natural than having Jin Sakai speaking English. Right, that to me did not feel natural.
Right.
But that's Daisuke. I do also want to touch on the two, well, you would say co-protagonists, if you want to call it protagonist and antagonist, from The Last of Us Part 2. Ashley Johnson is Ellie. If I'm making, I'll just jump out and make my prediction right now. This is, I think, Ashley Johnson's kind of, if she doesn't get it, I'll be very surprised. I think that this is a moment to sort of celebrate Ashley Johnson as Ellie. I could be wrong, but we'll see what happens. I think it would be an interesting twist if they gave it to Abby. Right, I think that would be even more interesting. So, in other words, as opposed to giving it to Ellie, to give it to Abby, because Abby was so, shall we say, divisive. Because again, a lot of people didn't like Abby as a character because Abby is known for one particular action. I'm not going to spoil it, but she's known for doing a certain thing that a certain number of people did not like.
And now, also not just not like, but question the motivations, which is understandable. I mean, I do understand that.
And look, my view on this is really simple from a creative perspective. If you are a creative developer and you're trying to do something and you're trying to do something provocative and you're trying to do something interesting, right? So in other words, you'd rather be interesting than, so in other words, if The Last of Us Part 2 was just Joel and Ellie ride again, and it was just this very sort of predictable narrative and this predictable story of just those two, riding off. I think that's what a lot of people would want, but I don't think that's what the developers wanted. I don't think they wanted this sort of predictable sequel in that way. I think they wanted to do something that was going to be controversial, that was going to be talked about, that was going to be discussed, right? And I think they wanted to do something that was in a direction that I think they wanted to have that wow moment. And I think one of the true tragedies of The Last of Us Part 2's release, which, by the way, I mean, this is, you'll see The Last of Us Part 2 is throughout these nominations. And by the way, it's sold brilliantly. So it's not like and it had a magnificent Metacritic score. So it's not like it was a tough year for The Last of Us Part 2.
Yeah.
But the one thing that was tough for The Last of Us Part 2 was that big leak that occurred right prior to its release. Right. And I wonder how the reaction would be different if people were able to just experience it without the leak. So in other words, if people were able to play The Last of Us Part 2 without prior knowledge of knowing what was going to happen, if that makes sense.
I see exactly what you're saying, because if you have when did the leak come out? May, the game came out in July, something like that.
Yeah, and it was like essentially all the cutscenes in the game, if you can even believe that. That's
oh my god. Okay, yeah. So if you spoiled yourself, you did yourself a disservice. I think. Yeah, because when you have these big moments that come up that rip your heart out, it's much better to experience it firsthand rather than know I'm going to be experiencing this in a few months, and you have more time to stew about it, and you have more time to be on Reddit and Twitter and angry and mad and questioning Naughty Dog and just getting upset. Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. That leak did a disservice to Naughty Dog, and maybe it's this person who leaked it. I don't even know if I was reading it earlier. I don't even know I know they know who it is, but I don't know what legal avenues they went down. Maybe because they didn't go down any, because like you just mentioned, the game sold phenomenally. Yeah. People played it, people bought it, and people explicitly stayed away from spoilers as much as possible. It was very hard because I did get a lot of insinuations on being on Twitter. It was very hard not to miss what people were understandably upset about. But yeah, I think if they would have just experienced it differently, they might have felt a little bit differently. That's all.
I couldn't agree more, and I think that it's just unfortunately the 2020 world that we live in, that these sort of things are a reality, that you have to worry about leaks. And then, by the way, you also have to worry, like as a director of a game, like for Neil Druckmann and things like this, you also have to worry about the death threats that ensue for the people who don't like the creative direction that you took, right? So that's just a very 2020 problem. So I'm actually going to put, as I'm making notes here, right? So my prediction for winner, and as well, I think I'm going to do two, right? Deserved winner, who I think should win, and then who I think will win. I think both in this instance for me are Ashley Johnson. I think Ashley Johnson deserves to win, and I think she will win. So that's my prediction there. Micah, where do you think best performance will land?
I think it's probably going to be a lot of game journalists are probably going to pick Ashley Johnson as well. It'd be interesting to see. That's for sure.
I'll also say this. I like Laura Bailey as sort of a sexy pick to upset. I like Abby as an upset. I think a lot of games journalists would vote for Abby just to sort of, I don't know, throw that wrench in there. So
I think there is some very, you get into Gamergate type of toxicity when it comes to the hatred for Laura Bailey and Abby. I mean, that poor woman experienced a lot of death threats just for doing a job, you know, like she didn't deserve that. You want to be upset at something, that's fine, but take it out on a punching bag, you know, do something constructive with your anger and hate. Make your own game property with a father-daughter protagonist and take it where you want to, rather than getting upset at other people with what they do with their properties.
Yeah, no tolerance for that sort of behavior, and games are to be celebrated. And if a creative direction is not in a direction that you would particularly choose, right, just remind yourself it's not your game, right? So in other words, it's someone else's game, and that's the direction they went with.
Detachment.
Yourself. Yes, exactly. So moving on to the next category, let's do audio design, right? So, and this is not score, this is not the music, right? So that'll be the next category, but this is sort of the design, the clicks and the booms, the ambiance, if you will. For the nominees, we have Doom Eternal, we have Half-Life Alyx, we have Ghost of Tsushima, we have Resident Evil 3, and we have The Last of Us Part 2.
So counting here, I've played 3 of these games: Doom Eternal, Ghost of Tsushima, and Last of Us Part 2. So I will comment on only these 3. I think Doom Eternal definitely has some great kind of like audio design of like everything from the way you pick up weapons to the way the guns sound whenever you're reloading, whenever you're firing, right? And even, you know, the music that integrates, that's part of audio design, right? So that's how you integrate the music, making it not overly loud or overly soft. That's all part of audio design. I think they do a great job in that game. But the real winners in my heart are probably going to be Last of Us Part 2 or Ghost of Tsushima. It's going to come down to one of those, I think. And I appreciate playing through Ghost of Tsushima right now. Just the very subtle ways that the wind wisps, the way the sound of the swords clanking together, arrows firing. Really, really, really cool. But probably Last of Us Part 2 is going to win.
I think it's really cool that they separate these two categories, because music and score are very different from audio design. And I understand this completely, right? So, and I'll go into it when we talk about music and score, but I think that's where you really have to start talking about Doom Eternal as essentially the front runner. But in audio design, I don't necessarily think so, just because audio design by nature lends itself to horror and suspense, because it's these little sort of noises that translate a otherwise calm and serene setting into this absolutely horrific setting, right? So, and I think that this is where Resident Evil 3, right, I think can have 1 nomination and 1 win. I think it's very possible that could happen. This audio design category is built for a game like Resident Evil 3. And that's in that same vein, it also lends itself to The Last of Us Part 2. So, because again, you have those suspenseful moments where, you can hear, and again, this is where you get into The Last of Us Part 2 and what makes the audio design of that game so magnificent, right? Which is what Neil Druckmann talked about. He wanted the antagonist, so the people that you're fighting, he wanted them to feel like real people. And I don't know how much you noticed this, but I noticed as I'm playing through the game, you can hear conversations between 2 people, talking to each other, and it feels like they're very, very like deep characters within that world. Like when you kill someone in that game, like they shout out for each other as if they're friends. When you kill someone's dog, they scream out for their dead dog. It's very, very real in that way. So I think the audio design of The Last of Us Part 2, I think it might be most deserving in that way, but I do think that Resident Evil 3 needs to be in the discussion. Ghost of Tsushima, again, you talk about, and maybe this will go towards game direction, which is when you talk about the wind and the way that you don't have a mini map, the wind blows you where you need to go, and how cool that is. I think that should be part of it. Half-Life Alyx, I'll be very straightforward. I didn't play Half-Life Alyx. It's a VR PC game, not necessarily my bag. And then Doom Eternal, which we'll get into more with the music and the score. But for me, I'll put it to you, Micah, first. Where do you think this is going to land?
I think it's going to be Last of Us Part 2. I think a lot of game journalists, if I'm voting, I would put it in one of those categories. You definitely mentioned Resident Evil 3, probably a great game for horror. I mean, there's a reason they put it in here. You're absolutely right. And for a horror game to work, you've got low lighting and all you can hear is sound. Yeah, that's going to freak you out.
Really, what percentage of a horror game, what percentage of what makes a horror game great is just really good audio design? You know what I mean? And I think you talk about the audio visual of the game. Horror is 100. That's what it's all about. That's the bread and butter for horror games. So I think that as much as I would love to say this, I think that it should be and it will be The Last of Us Part 2. So I'm going to mark that for myself as well, just because again the attention to detail that went into the attention to detail that went into individual people talking to each other and the surrounding sort of, I don't know, the ambiance of the character development. To me, Last of Us Part 2, audio design, that's the winner for me.
Final answer.
I agree. Moving on to the next category, which I'm very excited to talk about, which is going to be Best Music and Score. So we have Doom Eternal, Final Fantasy VII Remake. By the way, we're going to start seeing this game more in the nominations. Hades, Ori and the Will of the Wisps, and The Last of Us Part 2. So Best Music and Score, Micah, feel free.
So having played Doom Eternal, definitely appreciate the music design in there, because with the push forward mechanics of the game, you definitely need something that keeps you going, pumps you up, and keeps you going. It definitely works very well in that game. Didn't play a lot of it to necessarily say this is my workout jam or anything like that, but I could definitely see how you would make that your workout music. I mean, it's definitely very, very good. But having not played Hades, which is a tragedy, and I do need to get that on the Switch at some point, and Ori and the Will of the Wisps, which I've heard good things about, and definitely can check it out on the Xbox. I'm going to just talk about Final Fantasy VII Remake and Last of Us Part 2. And I think this is going to come down to nostalgia versus nostalgia, or old school nostalgia versus new school nostalgia. So Last of Us Part 1 came out in 2012, and people appreciated the subtle guitar of Gustavo playing throughout the game.
Yep.
And that kind of new Western type of music, right? And it's definitely very relaxing and also at the same time suspenseful. And hard to describe, but it's just I think it's this new school nostalgia that some people appreciate. And then you have the old school nostalgia of Final Fantasy VII, Nobu Uematsu, if I'm pronouncing it right. I apologize if I'm not. And having remastered that with a few others on this category too, I think it's going to be a toss-up between these two games in my heart. And having played more of Final Fantasy VII Remake, I definitely have more of that music in my head compared to Gustavo. I think it's going to go to this one. I think there's enough game journalists that, have it in their heart to put it here. But, I can't vote for others. But if I were to vote, that's the one I would pick.
So you're going with Gustavo in this?
No, I'm going for Nobu Uematsu Masashi.
You're going for Final Fantasy VII?
I am going for Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Yeah. So I think that when we look at the sound score, my take is really simple, right? So obviously, much love to Gustavo. I think that his work on the original Last of Us was you talk about some of the music and scoring and all of that. It's some of the most subtle and understated music that is truly beautiful. In that you can hear. I don't know that the music in The Last of Us Part 2 was as good. I think it was even somehow more understated, which at some points it actually became almost non-existent for me as I'm playing through the game. I don't know how much music I really even heard, or at least how much it registered in my brain. So it wasn't really to the forefront in my mind. It didn't strike me as something that, wow, I really need to recognize this excellence. I really need to recognize this. It just didn't hit me that way. When I talk about Hades, and this is where I don't understand why Hades is not on PlayStation or Xbox platforms. To me, this boggles my mind. I just wanted to bring this up at one point during this conversation, right? So I don't know what the holdup is for Supergiant Games. Bastion, which I know was originally a PC game, but it launched on PlayStation as a PS Plus game. It did very well. Transistor did very well on PlayStation. I don't know how well Pyre did. But this is a developer that has a great relationship with PlayStation. I'm not sure about their relationship with Xbox. I just don't know much about that. But this is a developer that should, you're talking about 100 plus million PS4s, 120 plus million PS4s in the wild. And now PS5, which is I don't understand why they're not launching on this platform. I know that they're working on it. I know that it's coming, but that's a whole nother ball of wax, as David said.
That's news to me that they're actually working on it, so I'm happy for that.
They said, and it's not even that they're working on it. What they said that it's something that we are going to do in the future. They didn't even explicitly say that it's in progress. So there's that, and then Final Fantasy VII. Just to touch on that really quickly, a very Japanese soundtrack, very Japanese sort of scoring, which is usually very, very good. JRPGs traditionally have outstanding music. If Final Fantasy VII were to win, that really wouldn't shock me. I'm reminded of games like Ni no Kuni and I Am Setsuna and all of these sort of JRPG classics that have these great, great sound scores. So it wouldn't shock me there. Half-Life Alyx, same. Oh, I'm sorry. And then Ori Will and the Wisps. I understand that scoring was very, very good. Very, very good music. But I think that Doom Eternal, just to be clear, I think Doom Eternal needs to be the winner here. And the reason why I think Doom Eternal needs to be the winner here is because I think it's the most recognizably outstanding musical performance of the year. As I'm playing through Doom Eternal, that heavy metal music is so unique and it's so standout, and it's so, like, you talk about outstanding, and these awards are meant to sort of reward outstanding performances. To me, this was literally in a league of its own. It was something that was so noticeable. It was something that I would actually put on headphones while I was playing just so I could really get into the zone. It improved the game by such a tremendous amount. So in other words, the biggest impact on the game itself, I think Doom Eternal had the biggest impact on its own game through the audio and through the scoring. So for me, it's got to be Doom Eternal.
I mean, you're definitely we're both shooting at the dartboard here. One of us is going to be closer, or we might not be close at all. So
I love it. And so now moving on to the next category, this is another one of my favorite categories, which is art direction. Right. So for art direction, here are our nominees. We have Final Fantasy VII Remake. We have Ghost of Tsushima. We have Hades. We have Ori and the Will of the Wisps. And we have The Last of Us Part 2. So for art direction, and again, this is a great category because as games continue to evolve and games become, I don't think it's any dispute anymore that games are art, right? But as it becomes more mainstream to have that line of thought, I think that the art direction stands out more. More people are recognizing this. Micah, where do you stand on art direction? Talk about the nominees.
So, reading the tagline for outstanding creative and/or technical achievement in artistic design and animation, thinking about that particular topic and looking at these nominees, and really to that point you were just saying with Hades, just that art design, I would say art direction, the direction that they take. Probably not even art design, but just so much that one right there is just very, very good. And watching the gameplay of it, really, really cool to see. Not something you see every day. Like a Final Fantasy VII Remake design, Ghost of Tsushima, Last of Us Part 2, you see that in any AAA game, this open world, 3D, mountains and background, etc., things like that. You see that a lot. But with Hades, just different, and I definitely appreciate that.
Just to jump on Hades really quickly, I think that all Supergiant games have that unique art style. Right, so if you go back to Bastion, you go back to Transistor, and even Pyre, all of those games have magnificent art designs. I mean, you're talking about, it almost looks like water paintings in terms of when you're looking at the world and you're looking at the characters, right? So shout out to Hades. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's fine. I mean, it's definitely a very good category for art. I mean, that's what they go for. Just looking at the background of this picture, it's just gorgeous.
Yep.
But thinking about which category will win, I think Last of Us Part 2 won't win this one because it's not really the art of the game. You don't really, I mean, I'm not going to say it was badly designed. It wasn't, it was definitely very gorgeous. But I don't think it's going to win. I think it's going to be a toss up between possibly Hades and Ori, looking at the unique style of these games. It's hard for me to say, but I'm going to put my money on Hades.
Hades definitely deserves a W at this particular ceremony. I think this is you talk about a great category for it to get the W. This is for sure it. This is right in its backyard. Again, you talk about those gorgeous hand-drawn, almost, like oil or water paintings. It looks phenomenal. The Last of Us Part 2. Now, the art direction of The Last of Us Part 2, it's very photorealistic, right? So when you talk about art direction, I think it's much easier to lend. So the winner of art direction is easier to lend towards, again, you talk about the more quote unquote artistic style. Whereas photorealistic is like, well, yes, they made Ellie look extremely real. They made Abby look extremely real as you're going through these downtown areas in terms of Seattle and all the roughage and all that stuff. It looks extremely real. How they made plants come to life in The Last of Us Part 2 is extremely impressive. Even it almost looks like, and again, there's no real ray tracing with a PS4 Pro, but I mean, again, it almost resembles that. I think The Last of Us Part 2, graphically speaking, looks better than some PS5 games that have come out now, right? So or Xbox Series X games that have come out now. It's certainly like if you were to compare The Last of Us Part 2 to something like Halo Infinity, right, which is supposedly this premier next-gen title, The Last of Us Part 2, a previous gen game, blows it out of the water. So I think The Last of Us Part 2 should be in consideration. Ori and the Will of the Wisps, same deal. I think it's we already have a George, right? So in other words, we have a magnificent hand-drawn art contestant in this particular nomination, and it's Hades, right? Ori and the Will of the Wisps feels like a second fiddle to Hades. Like we already have a George in this sense, right? So to use a Seinfeld reference, right? So I think that Ori will sort of fall behind Hades in this way. Ghost of Tsushima should be recognized. I think that, and this might be where I lean my vote in. So Ghost of Tsushima, as beautiful and as photorealistic as The Last of Us Part 2 is, and as hand-drawn and gorgeous as Hades is, I think that Ghost of Tsushima is the most unique. It elevated the game. So again, to go back to the scoring and the audio, whereas Doom Eternal's audio and score, I think, elevated the game, I think that Ghost of Tsushima's visuals elevated the game more than any of the other visuals elevated their individual games. I think it just generated the most improvement on the game experience, the game itself. So I'm actually going to say Ghost of Tsushima here. I think Ghost of Tsushima is going to get some W's, and I think this is a great category for Ghost of Tsushima to get one, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. If I had a second choice, and now you're making me reconsider my choice here. I mean, yeah, you mentioned that blending of photorealism with hand-drawn aspects, and that game had some great examples of that. Yeah, certain scenes reminded me of playing, through, similar to like Red Dead and the open world design of photorealism, but also the hand-drawn aspect of Breath of the Wild too. Definitely makes you feel like you're in a different world, which, for us being, East Coast Americans, it is a different world, feudal Japan. So very, very cool.
I want to throw this out there and see, because I'm just thinking about this now on the fly, right? So Hades with that art direction, right? And maybe I'm going to make you second guess your choice here. So Hades with that art direction, isn't it very similar to Transistor and Bastion and Pyre? Isn't this very much sort of becoming and I'm not saying this in a bad way, but isn't this becoming a signature Supergiant art style? And the reason why I'm saying this as almost a negative is that haven't we seen this before? Right. Yeah. So whereas Ghost of Tsushima, when they do the feudal Japan and they're doing their whole thing there, to me, that feels like more of a sort of a unique sort of thing that we haven't seen before. Although photorealism is something we've seen a million times before, but I don't know. To me, Hades, the reason why I'm not giving it to Hades is because I think as impressive as that art style is, and it's very Supergiant, as impressive as it is, I feel like we've seen it before.
You're not wrong about that. And I'm going through the current nominees right now of previous years to see who won. And, it's not always the game of the year, right? It's sometimes a very unique game, like in 2018, a puzzle game called Return of the Obra Dinn.
Gorgeous game.
I never played this, but apparently just looking at this art design, very unique. You do not see this every day. But to your point, well, Supergiant Games, we kind of see this every few years from you. Come on, give us something new, kind of thing. But
by
still,
the way, Return of the Obra Dinn, very, very hand-drawn and very hands-on, right? So that actually bodes well in your direction for Hades, because again, that sort of hand-drawn art style, it's more meticulous, more attention to detail, more artistic, right? The photorealistic, the quote-unquote best graphics, right? So in other words, Ellie sweating in the sunlight, right? The best graphics. Not always the winner.
Yep, no, exactly. I mean, NBA 2K21 could be the best art direction if it was based off sweating, but it's not in this case. But yeah, no, looking at this, I mean, it seems like the award usually goes to a game that's very unique, like Cuphead won in 2017. So I'm gonna stick with Hades.
By the way, I think you're onto something. Cuphead, very hand drawn, very hands on, very artistic, right? So again, but anyway, moving on. So we're gonna go to best narrative, which is actually it gives me an opportunity to shout out a game that is probably second or third on my game of the year personal choices that really does not get a lot of love. So I can give it a little shout out here. Best narrative: 13 Sentinels, Aegis Rim, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Ghost of Tsushima, Hades again. And The Last of Us Part 2 again, right? So game direction, that's where we're going. Micah, go ahead. What do you think of these nominees?
So before I do that, I want to ask you, of these 5 nominees, I'm sorry, I'm counting wrong here. What do you notice about 4 of these nominees?
PlayStation exclusives.
PlayStation exclusives, and that is exactly why we are a PlayStation podcast. Best narrative is this category, right? And that's why we're going to talk about topic 3 in a minute. The single player experiences are just exactly why people come to PlayStation all the time. And that's why it's so hard looking at these games. Like, they all have great narratives. Final Fantasy VII Remake, I mean, it's just a very good game of a ex-soldier who has no memory, and he's trying to understand like what happened to his past, but at the same time going beyond his normal morose way of living, why should I care kind of feeling, and remembering some things about his childhood. Ghost of Tsushima, I mean, it's basically a vengeance story, coming down to it, but also very good. I haven't finished it, so I don't know where it goes yet. Hades, don't know a lot about the narrative, but I appreciate that it's here because it tells me that this game definitely has some kind of narrative to it. And Last of Us Part 2, easily good narrative, depending on which group you land in. Are you a fan of Ellie, or are you a fan of Abby? So hard to say with this category, but if I had to pick one, it's probably going to be Last of Us Part 2.
So I'll start by opening up with who I think won't win, which is Hades. I think if we're talking about Hades, a good opportunity for them to get a W, I don't think this is one, because Hades, being sort of a roguelike game as it is, where it's different kind of every time, I think it's going to be difficult for Hades to win best narrative, even though obviously, look, we're talking about sort of that mythology, that sort of Greek mythology, I believe, that exists in Hades. So I think that they do have some great characters. There's a reason why it's nominated. But I think the competition's a little bit too stiff, especially when you talk about those Sony first-party games like The Last of Us Part 2 and Ghost of Tsushima. I think that's uphill sledding right there to go up against those games.
Yeah.
And I'll talk a little bit about both of those in a second, but I want to give a huge, huge shout out, and I'm so happy. This is why we talk about the integrity of the Game Awards and why it's so important that it's just not the AAA titles and these games that are, sort of, again, the most marketed games that are, maybe the biggest in sales, et cetera, right? That they're not always the nomination. Aegis Rim, 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim is one of the best games I played all year. I love this game. If you are a fan of visual novels, if you are a fan of story-based games or JRPGs, even though it's not technically an RPG, but if you're a fan of that sort of style of game, right? And the art direction in this game is also phenomenal. I'm surprised it wasn't nominated for art direction, right? So this is a 10 out of 10 game. It is extremely engaging. It's very, very good. And the narrative it's very Japanese in the sense that you're talking about high school kids and day-to-day lives and all this stuff, but it involves really weird sci-fi things like time travel and aliens and space. And you would think like that's kitchen sinking it. It's too much. I'm here to tell you it is not. It melds it all together. It's really, really phenomenal. I think that it's the best written story of 2020. I think that it deserves to win. Whether or not it will win, I think is going to be another thing. So when I pick my actual prediction, I think it's going to be tough and Ghost of Tsushima has a great story, right? Especially when you get to the end, there's some tough decisions that you make that are actually like real decisions that affect the end of the game. So I think Ghost of Tsushima is really, really cool and really great in that way. But to me, I think it's hard to fight with the champion here. I think The Last of Us Part 2, it's a category that was quite literally. I think it's difficult not to pick this game. I think it'd be extremely shocking if The Last of Us Part 2 does not win Best Narrative.
Right. I I mean, that's the problem when you have a juggernaut. It's very hard to go against a juggernaut. But you look at previous years, sometimes they do. It always depends.
You got some previous winners?
I do have some previous winners, and we should have been doing this before. But if I start
agree.
off in 2019, which is, do you remember 2019, Joe? It was so long ago.
Oh man.
Best narrative winner was Disco Elysium, going against Death Stranding, The Outer Worlds, Control, and A Plague Tale: Innocence, which not all AAA, but some of those, like Death Stranding, had some very high hopes about it.
For what it's worth, on Disco Elysium, that had a ton of hype going into the Game Awards. That was a game that was seen as a socially relevant narrative that was very, very big at the time. So I think that one had some hype, but I agree. It highlights the fact that the juggernaut does not always win.
Right, but in 2018, you had Marvel Spider-Man, God of War, Life is Strange 2 Episode 1, Detroit Become Human, and Red Dead Redemption 2 being the winner, which I agree with, of course. But Detroit Become Human, what a narrative, man. That was you had some hard choices to be able to make through that game. And same thing with Marvel Spider-Man and God of War, good narratives, having played those games.
But I think Detroit Become Human is going to run into the same problem that 13 Sentinels is going to run into, the same problem that Ghost of Tsushima is going to run into, which is that it's hard to go at the champ and walk away, right? So when you're going against Red Dead Redemption 2, when you're going against The Last of Us Part 2, like I said, especially when it comes to storytelling, I mean, that's a tough win. That's going to be tough for them to pull it out. So I'm saying The Last of Us Part 2. Micah, what is your official prediction?
I'm going to have to go with Last of Us Part 2. It's hard to go with the juggernaut.
I think that's smart. Okay. So
it's fake money we're betting anyway. So it's just our honor on the line.
A good handshake on the line. You know what I mean? So let's go to the next category, which is Best Game Direction, essentially the Best Director Award. We have nominees: the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Again, Final Fantasy VII Remake. Tons of nominations. We have Ghost of Tsushima. We have Hades. We have Half-Life Alyx. We have The Last of Us Part 2. I think, and I'm tossing it over to you, Micah, but I think this is an interesting watch out for Half-Life category.
I agree. I think since Half-Life is here, and I do have an Oculus. I definitely do not like it that much. My kids like it a lot more than I do, but it is definitely something I'm going to have to look out for when it's on sale. But I think hearing there was no buzz or hype going in. Well, maybe there was, and I just missed it. But hearing the buzz after it was released, I think this one is probably going to eke out a win, simply because of the fact that it just was able to blend virtual reality very well without making it a gimmick anymore, which is very hard to do with VR. VR, in my opinion, is a gimmick. I'm not a big fan of it, but hearing this is game direction, right? This is not anything to do with, the narrative, the story, the voice acting. This is just how you blend all of that together to make a game and to direct it. And hearing the amount of buzz about it, like a lot of people, I think heard, comments, even if we never get a Half-Life 3, at least we got Half-Life Alyx, right? So I think this one will probably eke out a win.
I agree. In the sense that I think this is a Half-Life category. I think that when you talk about journalists, right? So I think that IGN gave this game a 10 out of 10. So this was a 10 out of 10 reviewed game. I think that it's Half-Life. So you talk about a very prestigious IP such as Half-Life. I think that carries a lot of weight. And so I think that when you talk about the degree of difficulty, and this is where I think that where God of War 2018 really excelled when they talk about sort of the entire game being in one shot, right? It's a one shot take, the entire game, right? The degree of difficulty that came along with that, I think is very well respected in that way. I think that game direction here, they're going to give points for degree of difficulty, much like, a skateboarder would get degree of difficulty in the X Games, right? In terms of the difficult trick that you do is going to be judged accordingly. I think doing a VR game, the degree of difficulty is just so much higher. I think that it would be real easy to sort of say that, while The Last of Us Part 2 with, sort of they had half Ellie, half Abby, and it was kind of a surprise. And that game direction is sort of a very bold and, odd choice, sort of what happens to some of the characters in The Last of Us Part 2, again, very strange direction, right? Very bold choices, could be seen as favorites for journalists and things like this. But I think that with Half-Life where it is and the chances that it took being a VR game. So in other words, people have been waiting for Half-Life 3 for how long, and they get Alex and it's a VR game. I think the boldness of the direction of that franchise, the boldness of the direction of that game, I think will be deserving of the win. And so I'm giving it, as much as it pains me, because to give it to a non-Sony sort of IP in this way, I think Half-Life Alex is the winner here.
I mean, it's hard to argue against it, and definitely one of those things where you can appreciate what other people do, because it just only makes your favorite console better.
Right.
And so just go into previous winners real quick. Best game direction in 2017 it was Breath of the Wild. Yep. In 2018, God of War, and then in 2019, Death Stranding. And these were going against a lot of other games that were very interesting. But yeah, with Half-Life Alyx, just very unique.
Yeah, and I think by the way, the just to highlight the 2018 winner, Breath of the Wild, right? Just an interesting sort of point of view, which is that I always thought that Horizon Zero Dawn was stolen there, or they were robbed there. I always felt like Horizon Zero Dawn was a better game than Breath of the Wild. It's a very unpopular take. I'm very much in a boat alone on that one, right? So by myself. But I always thought that Breath of the Wild was just a better game than, that Horizon Zero Dawn was just always a better game than Breath of the Wild. But so be it. But I think that you talk about God of War winning. Again, I think that realistically, I think Half-Life Alyx is going to be, in my opinion, that's going to come out on top here.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if they didn't, but also not shocked.
Yeah, but let's move on to the most exciting category, the big boy, the Game of the Year 2020, right? The official 2020 Game of the Year as dictated by Jeff and crew. So we have 4 nominees for Game of the Year: Doom Eternal, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Ghost of Tsushima, Hades, and by the way, the first time we see this one, Animal Crossing New Horizons. I'm interested to see if, by the way, I'm going to talk about how that's a real sleeper, and The Last of Us Part 2. So Game of the Year, interesting nominees, especially when you consider Animal Crossing. What are your take on these nominees?
So I have played all of these except for Hades. So that is a tragedy. Again, maybe my New Year's resolution, it will be to play Hades. But
get it together, Supergiant.
Yeah, so we've already talked about all these games already and made our comments about it. But Animal Crossing came out at just a perfect time, at the beginning of this pandemic, right? And it very so this kind of game is hit or miss with some people. And for me, I always get into them similar to Pokemon. I get into them for a little bit and then I get over it real quick. And same thing happened with Animal Crossing. It's definitely cute. My kids love it. They definitely like playing, and it was kind of fun playing on an island with them. We all shared the island, and I had to tell them, all right, that orange grove over there, that's mine. Don't go picking those oranges, because if you do, you're going to steal my bells, and I'm going to be mad at you, and you won't ever get Robux again. So, and it was fun from the perspective of being able to play with my sister, who was, she lives in Kentucky. So being able to play with her at the same time, she would come over, trade. She would get some fruit from me. I would get some from her by going to her island. And I think it was very interesting what a lot of people did. Very creative ways of making islands. I mean, it even got to a certain point where a certain political campaign got into the game as well too. Yep. So very, very interesting choice for Game of the Year. And I don't think it's a bad choice. I don't think it's going to win though, compared to some of these others. But I definitely do appreciate that it's here, because it is giving some love to Nintendo for their big title. Definitely again, one of these games that it's just like, what's the point of it? And it's like, well, make the point yourself. You can do anything with the island.
I think Animal Crossing is 2020 the game. In other words, it's 2020 the video game. It is It is so perfectly and so uniquely 2020 that I think that it's very, very sexy sleeper to win Game of the Year. And the reason why I think this for multiple reasons. Number one, 20 plus million people can't be wrong. You talk about the sales of Animal Crossing, it's overwhelming. This is, it's like one of the top selling games essentially of all time, right? I forget where it sits on the list, but it's up there, right? 20 plus million sales for Animal Crossing New Horizons.
Right.
So there's that aspect of it. there's also the aspect of the fact that, and again, we already talked about this, but it's just a socially relevant game, right? So in other words, much how like Disco Elysium was a socially relevant game, this is a socially relevant game for 2020, right? So again, you had political campaigns getting involved on Animal Crossing, again, as a way to reach people. But so just to give respect where it's earned with Animal Crossing, that being said, I do not think it should win. It should not win. This is for Game of the Year. This is for the best Game of the Year. Now, we're talking about a game, and I'm not saying simple games can't be great games, right? Platforming is essentially, run, jump, and secure yourself on a platform, right? So in other words, I'm not saying simplicity is bad, right? Gone Home is a very simple game, right? There's not even any mechanic besides exploring a house, right? So simplicity is not inherently bad. But we're talking about shaking trees, taking apples, and trading bugs for furniture, right? I just don't see how you can objectively, not subjectively, because subjectively is through the lens of 2020. When we talk about 2020, the game, that's a subjective opinion. That is, with the quarantine and everything that's going on, this really fits the mold for how we feel in 2020, right? Subjectively, it fits the bill. Objectively, I don't know how. I just don't know how you can look at a game like of the immense quality and of the AAA caliber and of the time and the attention to detail and of everything that went into it, like The Last of Us Part 2 or Ghost of Tsushima for that matter, and sort of say, no, Animal Crossing Bugs for Furniture is a better game objectively, because that's ultimately what the Game Awards is trying to decide, right? It's saying objectively, here are the achievements in gaming. I just don't see how you can do it. But my fear, and this is where I get into, I think it's a real sexy pick to win, because my fear is that The Last of Us Part 2, Ghost of Tsushima, and let me pull up the list here. So The Last of Us Part 2, Ghost of Tsushima, Hades, and maybe even a little bit Doom Eternal, they could all split their votes. So in other words, I think that the people who would vote for those games, right, are all like-minded individuals who could, not all, but a lot of them could be like-minded individuals who could split that particular vote. But I think there's going to be a good amount of people who are going to vote Animal Crossing subjectively or objectively as the best game. I think it's an interesting pick to win. Is it my official prediction to win? I'm so tempted to do it, but I can't do it. But I think that, ultimately, I think watch out for Animal Crossing in this category.
I could see the scenario as a game journalist, having played every one of these games and appreciating what you're mentioning, a game that delivers the absolute best experience across all creative and technical fields, and thinking, well, all of these do it, so I'm just going to pick Animal Crossing for the LOLs. They're just going to do it because you know what? I mean, that game does deliver a good experience. The best, maybe not, but from the perspective of what you just said, 2020, the game, yeah, I mean, this game basically casts you on an island, which, who wouldn't want to be on an island quarantined away from everybody right now, so, I mean, it definitely was a good game to keep people in their homes for a couple weeks, months, years.
I think the 2020 narrative has been, how can we keep ourselves busy at home? And that is literally what the plot of Animal Crossing is. It's keeping yourself busy at home. That is literally what you're doing. You are at your home, you're just keeping yourself busy with busy work. That is quite literally Animal Crossing's entire plot. And I don't want to oversimplify it, because I think that, look, again, to give its due where it's earned, right? Animal Crossing brings people together. It's immensely, like I said, we already talked about its immense popularity, right? It gives games accessibility, which is something that some people really give a lot of credit to. It brings people into the genre, it brings people into sort of the medium, right? It introduces people to gaming. It has that sort of Nintendo element to it, where it's like baby's first game, right? It very much has that. Now, but again, I just don't know from a quality standpoint how you can look at it, point at it, and say, yep, that's the highest quality game I played in 2020.
Yeah, it's hard to say that, because, I mean, again, Ghost of Tsushima, very quality game. Final Fantasy VII Remake, quality game. Doom Eternal, only having played like the first few levels of it, and realize, honestly, if I had to say, Doom Eternal is probably not the game for me from a first-person shooter perspective. It's not that I hate it; it's just that I'm not in love with it. So come back to it later, because I do own it. That's the nice thing about owning games. You can always come back to it when you feel like it.
Sure can. So I'm gonna say my official prediction. I think this is the deserved title. I think this is the title that should win. I think it's the title that will win. I think it's an absolute highway robbery if it doesn't win. I think the game of the year has to be The Last of Us Part 2. I'm marking that down. Micah, your official prediction.
I'm gonna go with you too. I'm gonna say Last of Us Part Two, simply because of the fact that it is the Juggernaut. In looking at previous game years, it's hard to beat the Juggernaut game, but it's not unheard of for that to happen.
And I understand it's kind of boring in the sense that it's almost going to be more of a coronation than it is an award ceremony, because I think everyone expects The Last of Us Part 2 to win. It's going to be sort of a boring result in the sense that, The Last of Us, of course they won, right?
Right.
But I think it's deserved. I don't think that you can give it to somebody else just for the sake of being, different, or, I don't know. At some point you just have to give it to the most deserving candidate.
Yep, I agree with that. I mean, there's a reason why Neil Druckmann just got elevated at Naughty Dog. I mean, he is a money-making machine for them. So, I mean, he's definitely doing his part there.
And shout out to the Uncharted movie, by the way, Tom Holland. That seems to be moving forward. And by the way, Naughty Dog, when I talk with my brother, right? So my brother and I have these conversations between us, and I'm making the argument that Naughty Dog is, in fact, the best developer in the world. Right. And again, the conversation is that Naughty Dog is the best developer in the world over, again, I think you would say that the king would be Nintendo proper first party. Nintendo proper first party, Mario, Zelda. It's hard to argue that they're not the best developer in the world just based on the quality and the history of those IP. But I think when you look at the history and the quality of Uncharted, The Last of Us, to a much lesser extent, Jack and Daxter. But I think Naughty Dog is really one IP away from overtaking Nintendo first party proper as the best developer in the world.
I think that's a great topic for a future episode. Is kind of like the looking at the different developers, best developer, maybe that's the kind of thing we should do at some point. But yeah, looking at Naughty Dog, they've been a software company since 1984. So they've been in the business almost as long as Nintendo has when you think about it. So definitely been around a long time. They have a lot of experience and they know what their fans want, and they know exactly, when we talk about our next topic, exactly what we'll talk about in a minute.
And really quickly, before we move on, there is a question for this topic. I just want to bring it up. The question for this topic is, do you have any predictions for any surprise announcements at the Game Awards? Which, by the way, if you want to write in your question, you want to hear it live on the air, feel free to write in, show@playnationpodcast.com, show@playnationpodcast.com. Write in with your question. We will answer your question. But this question, any surprise announcements? Because the Game Awards aren't just obviously winners and losers. The Game Awards does do a great job of having these surprise announcements. That's why I said I compare it to E3. It has a very E3 vibe. Before we move on to topic 3, can you see anything coming out of nowhere, coming out of this award show?
So what would give my heart joy is if the Cyberpunk got delayed one more time just for the LOL. But Cyberpunk's coming out this Tuesday, so not going to happen.
That would be crazy.
It would just be 2020 in a nutshell.
That would be.
But yeah, I'm looking forward to that game to talk about it. But anyway, I don't know. I'm hoping there is some good announcements coming. I know, Sony's already showed what is in the bag for the future when we saw the game showcase a couple months back. I think there will be some interesting surprises. I don't know what they will be. I'm hoping, my personal hope is God of War Ragnarok. I would like to be able to see something about that.
My personal hope is Horizon Forbidden West. I want to see more Horizon Forbidden West. I think that would be, if I see that would be my jump up and down moment. So
that's a safe bet.
If we see either Ragnarok or Forbidden West, I think it's a great night for Sony fans. So moving on, as we were, to topic 3, which is a very interesting topic, and I'm happy that we're discussing it here because I think it speaks to us directly, right? So topic 3, the Sony single-player games leak. If it seems that Sony's success in the single-player world has been deliberate, it's because it is, right? The leak obtained by Vice, Sony is very aware of how the PlayStation users spend their time. The Sony presentation that was leaked submits that the popular idea that single-player gaming is somehow dying is wholly false. And Sony submits that single-player gaming is, in fact, thriving and could even be bigger if gamers, especially older gamers, wink, wink, us, are able to better manage their time. Sony showed off activities, which would allow gamers to jump into specific game sections or missions and give it an approximate time to complete. By the way, it's almost like we saw this with PS5 and activities, and if only there were cards that would show us this. The presentation presents this by showing a man holding a cup of coffee and a baby to highlight this dilemma. I said, this is presumably a picture of you, Micah, holding a baby, playing a game with a cup of coffee. The presentation also makes the daring declaration that gamers are spending more time offline than online. I thought that was super interesting, that gamers are somehow offline more than they're online, considering all the Fortnites and all that jazz. Sony highlights 4 key problems players reported, and these are interesting as well. 1, not knowing how long they need. 2, the amount of time needed to locate solutions. And 3, engaging socially without encountering spoilers. Last of Us Part 2. Shout out to you on that. And then 4, lastly, forgetting what they were doing the last time they played. That's also a very uniquely old gamer problem, I think. You read this leak as well, Michael. What did you make of this? Right. So is this something we already knew, or is this something that? Well, I think it is something we already knew. But what were your thoughts on it?
So my thought is that this was something I intuitively knew, but did not state out loud. Right. So over the past decade, back in the 360 days, I was a younger man and also had more friends playing the Call of Duties. And that was where the game experiences led me, is being able to put my headset on, talk to friends, play with them. And then over the past decade, that slowly started to fade away. Friends of mine just stopped playing certain games. Everybody was playing something different. And it was just kind of like, okay, I guess I'll die now. I just won't play games. But got a PS4 and slowly over time started to develop an appreciation for the single player experience. And I used to be this person who would go after the next great MMO. I love World of Warcraft because of the social aspect of it. But then nobody I knew was playing that. Nobody I knew was playing any game I wanted to play. So I just started playing single player experiences. And I appreciate what Sony is doing here, because it's good that they have this data. Because, if a social media company knows exactly how long I'm spending looking at an image and they're going to recommend more images like that, it's almost insane to think about the kind of stuff that the data and metrics that Sony has on their players to be able to share with their partners, to be able to be like, this is what gamers want. Gamers who played this particular game will want to play your game when it has these kind of elements in it. And you mentioned, a picture of a man holding a baby and a game controller and a coffee in his hand. I actually do have a picture of me feeding one of my sons with a bottle underneath my chin. I'll share it on the website just as a fun thing.
I saw that description and I was just like, that's Micah.
Yeah, it was me playing Xbox at the time. Had a bottle under my chin while a kid was in the crook of my arm, and I was just kind of like playing Xbox. You had to do what you had to do. But the point is that when you're playing these games, it's hard when you don't know, well, how long is this mission going to take, or how long is this particular objective going to take? Just this checkpoint alone took 30 minutes. I don't have enough time for this. That's why, as a parent, and even just as a person who has a busy lifestyle, if you're not going after video games all the time, it's very hard to just get into a game and relax if you don't know how long you have to relax. So the idea of Sony developing activities around that is great. And with Sackboy, I did get a chance to actually try that with a few things. I actually jumped around a little bit in the game because it said this level will take 5 minutes. So I was like, okay, I got more than 5 minutes, but let's check it out anyway. I think it's great because it speaks to what the reality is, that in my opinion, multiplayer gaming is a young person's game. People want to be with their friends, and I want to be with my friends too. I definitely want to be able to play games with them. There's got to be an experience out there that you or I could share together. Same thing with other friends too. But for the most part, when I'm playing games lately, it's all single player experiences. And I appreciate that Sony has that data to back it up, to say that this is what the majority of fans want. And we can go into it in a future topic, that, with a lot of these multiplayer games, it is a microtransaction infested swamp. And, being a parent of kids who play these games, every few days, it's like, Dad, can I have V-Bucks? Dad, can I have Robux? And I'm like, son, can you do the dishes? Can you show me some value here about, what I'm spending money on here? And it's just insane the amount of microtransactions that go into these games. And that's one reason of many I tend to avoid them.
I'm going to have to see some cost-benefit analysis before I release any credit card numbers.
Exactly.
I think that ultimately, number one, this is a topic where I want to relate with our listeners, because ultimately this is something that speaks to me so loudly, because I already knew, and we already knew, This is why I said, like, well, is this even really a shock? Because I think we all already knew that Sony was taking this direction with games, because that it was becoming about these single player experiences. It was becoming about these mature sort of adult sort of experiences in games, things like Uncharted and, Last of Us, etc. Right now, even more interesting, right? So is that, think back to episode 1 when I'm sort of giving, because I want people to relate to this. When I was going through my history of my gaming, right? When I'm talking about the only interstitial time when I was not playing video games in my life was sort of between my teenage years and my sort of adult years, right? It was that time, because in my teenage years, it was very much PlayStation 2. You're talking about sports games, competitive games, everyone huddled around the television, kind of just drinking cheap beer and having a good time.
That was a multiplayer experience right there.
Exactly. And then the adult years, because ultimately once you make that leap from the teenage years to the adult years, the reason why you're not doing that, because that's not what your friends are doing anymore. Everyone's working. Everyone's like, right now, I mean, like, we're working 40, 50-hour work weeks, right? We don't have time to sort of, 5 days a week sit around and have Marvel v Capcom 2 tournaments. It's just not the type of gamer that we are. And it also speaks to, when I said I'm sort of a reformed Nintendo fan, right? Nintendo doesn't speak to me in this way either. So Nintendo has the family-friendly games, which is great. I love having that arrow in my quiver, so to speak, right? So with Sackboy and Astro's Playroom, I like going through family-friendly. I don't mind watching a Pixar movie, right? I like those types of games. But Sony speaks to me as a gamer that is in his 30s, that is really looking for sort of an artistic, mature experience that I can sort of wrap my head around and sort of sit down and enjoy. Something that's single player. I don't need other people to play. I can play offline. I can trophy hunt. I can experience the story. It's maybe 40, 50 hours at most. Maybe if you think of God of War or Last of Us Part 2, even shorter than that, right? That respects my time, that doesn't require too much of me, and that I can get through at any difficulty I see fit. So I think that the fact that Sony is speaking to gamers in this way is really, really pleasing to me. And I think that this is the secret to their success. I think it's why sort of the Xbox has not been able to generate exclusives in this way, like The Last of Us or Ghost or anything Sucker Punch is doing, right? I think it's why Nintendo, right, is really centered around sort of the family-friendly stuff. I think this presentation shows why PS4. This is why PS4 sold 120 million. Because the people with the purchasing power, the people with the money in their pockets, are the ones who are making the decision, and those are it's the adults who want that experience. If that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does make sense. I think you mentioned the fact that being an adult, you don't have much time for games, and
Right.
you really don't. And when you do play a game, you want to play something that's meaningful. And the next Call of Duty, Black Ops, Modern Warfare, I'm a I don't even know. It's just like it doesn't speak to me. Like the single player campaign possibly speaks to me, but I'm also not a first person shooter as well.
It's also important to note that I don't think I could keep up if I wanted to, just because when you talk about these millisecond reaction time type games like Call of Duty multiplayer, like clicking heads and just, taking names, like I couldn't keep up with that. I mean, I jumped into Call of Duty multiplayer and it took me like 5 or 6 hours, and eventually I started having a kill death ratio that wasn't completely embarrassing,
Right.
but look, I'm not going to be able to compete with the 14-year-old in Skokie, Illinois, who's got the trigger finger sort of reactions, who plays 8 hours a day. Like I can't compete with that person.
That's hard to compete with. And you see these esports veterans who, they're only at the ripe old age of like 23, 24, and they're already retiring or something like that because they cannot compete with younger players. I mean, it's very hard. And also that kind of community could also lead to a lot of toxicity and also just too much competitiveness that it's just more damaging to you than anything else.
I would love to do esports as a future topic, but I think when you look at esports, and I wish I had, we can always look up the official number, but I think people age out when you talk about, competitive gamer athletes that compete in esports. They age out around like 22 years old, something like that. It's something outrageously young. It's like gymnasts. You know what I mean? It's just like they age out so quickly. Once you're 23, 24, it's like you're an old man in that arena. Yeah,
no, absolutely. I mean, and to your point of not being able to keep up in Call of Duty, when I have a kill death ratio of like 0.2 or whatever, it's ridiculous. It's just like, why am I even playing this? I'm just being murked right here.
For me, 50-50 is a success. If I have one kill for every death, I think that's pretty good. And ultimately, it goes back to something we talked about on a previous episode, which is to me, maybe more important than anything, which is respecting my time. I do not have, and this is where we get into respecting my time, I do not have 40 to 50 hours to quote unquote get good at Fortnite, to the point where I'm now competing at these high levels, or Call of Duty where I'm competing. Fortnite's not as competitive, but like Call of Duty or say Overwatch, another good example, right? So I don't have the time to just dump into this on the off chance that it's something I'm enjoying being good at, right? I'd much prefer, like 10 to 1 prefer a set experience where you have thoughtful people who have thought of this experience that they want to give me, and I experience it. I would 10 to 1 prefer that.
Yep, I agree. I see the kind of dichotomy between my two sons. One of them is that kind of Fortnite player who says get good at a game. My other son is the kind of one who is not good. I mean, he's just not as good as his brother or his friends. And when he dies, he gets very much upset about it, and he gets very much upset. And I'm like, just don't play the game, because that's the point when you're in a first-person shooter where you guys shoot each other. You're going to die occasionally. You either get good or you play something else. Just play something that's more relaxing. I'm trying to direct him towards single-player experiences, because you don't need that kind of negativity and toxicity in your life.
No, you really don't. And well, I understand that the competitive part of it is also the fun part of it. So in other words, like example. So in other words, when I'm playing the Rip Snorter trial in Sackboy, right, I'm getting upset as I'm dying over and over again. But in a way, that's the fun part. I'd imagine, if you're say 14 years old playing Fortnite and you're getting murdered all over the place, but you're getting slowly better. I get that. But again, it boils down to sort of the time investment that's necessary, and as well the social aspect, which, look at it this way, like I have no interest in engaging in an online chat with a Call of Duty multiplayer. Like I have no interest in putting on the headset and sort of saying what's going on, guys, and just seeing what's happening in that chat. Like I have no interest in that. And again, that's very much, I would say, a young person's game.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we're getting older, and we got to go with the experiences that match our lifestyle. And Sony has a data that shows there's more of us than there are of them. So I think we live in the golden age of single player experiences, and that will continue.
I totally agree with that. And ultimately, look, let's address the question for this topic, right? So we have a question for every topic. You can write in your question. We will read it and we will answer it on air. You can email us at show@playnationpodcast.com. Email us your question, show@playnationpodcast.com. The question for this particular topic is this leak in any way damaging to Sony? I find it, so when you think of a leak, right, leaks are inherently negative sort of things, but to me, this almost feels like they could have leaked this on purpose and it would be a win for them.
Yeah, so this particular leak is not damaging to them. In fact, it's only encouraging. And reading comments on any articles, you see a lot of people just saying the same thing. It's like, yep. I mean, I'm glad. This is why I stick with Sony. So yeah, I don't think it's damaging. I think it's only very positive direction, but it also comes down to the ethics of reporting on this kind of thing. So this is one of those, if we were to have a controversial episode, this would probably be it, like giving so much credence to a leaked topic like that. But it's out there, it's a discussion, and we don't want to shy away from that without going, we're not going to provide you the links to go view this data. You can certainly find that on your own, but people are talking about it, and we're more focused on the idea that single player experiences. Sony definitely feels those are the not necessarily the moneymaker, but where the actual players are playing their time.
I think it's so interesting because it speaks to brand awareness, and because ultimately when I read this leak, it tells me, again, my reaction was, wow, so this is what, yes, this is confirmation bias, right? This is telling me like, yeah, this is why I like Sony in the first place. Yeah, they're doing single player experiences. They're respecting my time. By the way, very brilliant the way that they introduced activities into the PS5 with the cards. It's worth shouting out that this leak actually came to fruition with regard to actual features on the PS5. So it shows Sony being sort of a team of action that they're willing to fulfill on presentations and things like that happen in boardrooms. That stuff comes to real life. So it's inspiring to see that. It's also inspiring to see, again, we talk about that they're speaking to me. But the reason why I mentioned the brand awareness part is because I also think it highlights sort of the vagabond status of Xbox. So in other words, if hypothetically, follow me on this, if PlayStation is the mature adult single player experience franchise, and you have Nintendo, which is the family friendly franchise, which is sort of, again, we talk about baby's first RPG, baby's first, shooter, etc., right? Where does that, from a brand awareness standpoint, from a brand sort of from an optical standpoint, from a marketing standpoint, is it my imagination, or does this sort of highlight where Xbox is kind of nowhere, that they're sort of in the middle of nowhere in terms of marketing and optics? Like what is the typical Xbox purchaser?
So I think the typical Xbox purchaser is the one who's playing Call of Duty. They're playing Fortnite. They're playing EA sports games that have microtransactions. I think, and maybe we'll see a Microsoft leak at some point that shows, I'm completely wrong. I mean, there is a reason they went with backwards compatibility so heavily. I mean, their data has to show that gamers are playing backwards compatible games. So I think it's hard to say where they are. Because Sony can also have people playing all these exact same games too, because they're available for every console. If they could run it on a potato, they would. As long as they can charge you money for a microtransaction, that's all these developers particularly care about. And I see a lot of toxicity around it, like people saying, man, it's the exact same game, it's the exact same skin, it's the exact same this. And I just think, why do you buy it then? At some point, speak with your wallet. Don't purchase this game year after year if it's not speaking to what you actually want to play.
I think the question, is this leak damaging to Sony? I actually think the answer that the leak is damaging to Xbox, because it's if you're playing all sides, because it shows that Sony is firmly entrenched in the sand, at least in one particular arena, right? Nintendo is firmly entrenched in the sand in one particular arena. For Xbox, it feels like, well, if you're everywhere, you're nowhere, right? I was watching the TV show Fargo last night, and there was an interesting line on it. There's like even a gold coin only has two sides. To me, it feels like Xbox needs to sort of say, look, this is where we're standing with regard to this particular item. And it could be anything, right? Maybe it is multiplayer. Maybe it is Madden. Maybe they are the Madden console. But they need to show that in some sort of a quantitative way. But I digress. That's my thought on that. Micah, just closing this out, right? So I think we covered all three topics. What are you playing this week? Right. So what are your plans for the week? What does the rest of the week look for Micah?
So the rest of this afternoon will probably spent cleaning a little bit, getting a little bit of side eye here, because I think this particular episode, we're going on the 2-hour mark almost. So we're doing fantastic, but Definitely got to do some things with this weekend time, because again, as a single player, as a older adult with a family, you got to get the responsibilities in. You can't just play video games all day as much as you'd love to. So a little bit of adult responsibilities. Maybe I'll get that platinum trophy and cleaning my room or something like that. But throughout the week, work week, zug, just got to keep working. What I'll be playing more of Sackboy, being that masochist I am, doing the gold medal challenges in Red Dead, going back through Ghost of Tsushima, playing through that game, trying to get good at being able to parry and block and things like that. Man, that game's a challenge. You talk about gameplay, that game particularly is very, very good at being able to, like, you can't just hack your way through it. You could on easy, but I don't want to. I want to give myself a little bit of a challenge. So that's what my week's like.
You have to be strategic with that particular game. And look, you're right. The gameplay is the strongest point. It's very reminiscent of Spider-Man in that way, in the sense that the gameplay is the bread and butter there. So Eric and I have a strategic action plan to clean the house after this podcast. So we're going to do some cleaning. I'm excited. I actually one of the few people that enjoy cleaning in a way. I love a clean house. So we're going to do that. Just to give the listeners an update, we were talking about Christmas decorations. We actually are you familiar, Micah, with those inflatable things that they almost have blow up engines, and they blow up into these big characters. You stick them on your front lawn, like big blow up.
I am quite familiar with that, as I currently have 5 or 6 of those on my lawn right now.
So we have a 2-story home, and on the second story outside our bedroom is a balcony, and we attached this giant dinosaur because our dog Yoshi, right? So we attached this giant green dinosaur, which we're calling Yoshi. We attached it to the balcony of our second floor, and we secured it down with all these ropes and stuff. We just did it last night. It's like the North Star of the neighborhood. It's so funny, but we attached that up there. If the cleaning is done and everything is if the holiday planning is in order, the house is clean, I will return to my masochistic ways and return to the Rip Snorter trial challenge and just continue to try to get that, and pulling out my hair and trying to see if I can get that done.
Well, good luck to you, sir.
Micah, this has been a magnificent episode, our longest episode, maybe our best episode. I don't want to go out there and say that, but maybe. But thank you everyone for listening. We appreciate your time. We appreciate you joining us today. We'll see you next week.